chapter 15, and at verse 1, I'm going to try to cover the whole chapter. Notice I said try. As you get into this, it's kind of like the more and more you study it and the more and more you look at it, the more and more you find. But I did pull out several, what I thought would be high points of it that we could do and kind of move on to chapter 16 next week. That's the tentative plan. Daniel, notice I didn't say read my lips. Okay? I quit that a long time ago. I found out that just didn't work. So anyway, we're going to take a look at that in just a minute. But first, there's a handout that I had to give you. I had said last week we're going to do a little handout doing the comparison of the type and shadow. Now, of course, this handout was taken from Brother Gaddis Roy's book, Types and Shadows, that we've been using. And, of course, a lot of this, like we did here a while back when we did a handout, we got about 14 points here that he brought out. And between Jeff and Robert and some others, we had like 20 points before it was over with the things that we saw. So like I say, as you get into this as a study, you're going to find more and more that it teaches us about the events that happen. But anyway, we find that 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 13 is used as a basic scripture, which we're not going to read, because I got to get into the body of the regular lesson. The salvation of Israel, a type of salvation from sin. And we know that, and we talk about that a lot, about the type and shadow of how the deliverance of Israel is a type of our deliverance from sin today, i.e. Egypt being typical of the world of sin. They were baptized in the Red Sea under Moses and came out on the other side with the sins washed away. And so we find, and this is what this is about. Bullet point 1, Israel in bondage in Egypt. On the right-hand side of it, sinners are in bondage in sin, and we know that. And so there is a parallel there. Israel was subject to and servants of Pharaoh. Sinners are subject to and servants of Satan today. So we find that there is a parallel that is there on that. Brother Conner handed you the wrong piece of paper. I got more paper than I got direction up here. Here you go. Huh? You didn't get one? Okay. There you go. And so we find that we see that shadow there in that. How sin of Egypt is parallel to the sins of being under the influence of Satan today. Number 3, the taskmasters was hard and cruel to Israel. Satan makes life hard for sinners, and we realize that. You know, that's really the hard way to go in life. Is to be caught up in sin, because that's what you are a slave of. Moses sent to save Israel. Christ was sent to save mankind. Israel had to accept the leadership of Moses. Sinners must accept the leadership of Christ. Israel had to believe Moses. Sinners must believe Christ. Israel had to turn from serving Pharaoh to follow Moses. Sinners must return from sin and repent and follow Christ. Israel was baptized under Moses. Sinners are baptized into Christ to be saved. Israel was delivered from the enemy when baptized. Sinners are delivered and saved from sin when baptized. Israel rejoiced and sang the song of deliverance after they were baptized under Moses. And this is what we're going to pick up in Exodus 15. We rejoice because of salvation after baptism. The law of Moses was given from Mount Sinai. The law of Christ was given from Mount Sinai. Israel was given physical food, manna. Christians are given spiritual food today, the Word. Many among the Israelites died in the wilderness. Many in the church apostatized and are lost. That's one of the things that you're going to see even in the Old Bible. When people talk about once saved, always saved, you don't find it in the Bible. Israel was delivered, and yet they apostatized after their deliverance. So one can be saved and again be lost. Many among the Israelites died in the wilderness. Many in the church apostatized and are lost. Canaan, the land of promise, heaven, the promised land. And so we find the type and shadow in what we've been studying here. And we talked about that as we were studying it and going along with it. So now we're going to move to Exodus chapter 15. The Psalm of Moses and Israel rejoicing in this psalm. And so you find that as you begin to look at this, can you imagine that picture of people having crossed the Red Sea, singing and rejoicing because of being delivered from death and destruction of the Egyptians? You know, that had to be quite a sight to see. And about the first 19 verses of this chapter is going to deal with that psalm. And we're going to kind of take a look at it in stanza format and read it. We're not going to try to break it down word for word because it's, again, studied within its own self. And a lot of it's pretty self-explanatory because we've already studied about the plagues in Egypt, Moses being the deliverer, crossing the Red Sea, and things of that nature. So one of the things that we're going to see in this, first part of this chapter, Israel looks back upon Egypt with a song of praise for their deliverance. The song itself, as we see it, verses 1 through 19, the solemn singing of it, verses 20 and 21, Israel marches forward in the wilderness, along about verse 22. Verses 23 and 24, we're going to find Israel quickly forgot what had happened. About 3 days into the journey, we're going to find an interesting word repeated over and over again, dealing with Moses, and that word is called murmuring. How soon they forgot. How soon we forget. And then we find the relief is going to be granted them, and that's going to show forth the power of God to help develop their faith, and that they depend upon God's word and their satisfaction in the waters of Elim. So we're going to take a look at that in this. In the psalm here, we find in verse 1, Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this psalm unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he hath thrown into the sea. And so we find that they're going to begin to sing this song. One of the things that we're going to find in this is that they expressed their joy in God and thankfulness for him by singing. It is almost natural for us to thus give vent to our joy and exaltation of our spirit. And have you ever noticed that? I mean, we're looking at it here in a religious context, but have you ever noticed it in general? A lot of times when you're happy, you've made peace with things, and you're going on your merry way, what do you find yourself doing a lot of time? Singing, all type of singing. Maybe humming, maybe whistling. You ever notice that? And it's just almost like a natural act of man. Can you imagine what transpired in this? They were so joyous and so happy to be at peace and satisfaction from salvation, they began to sing. And it looked like when you go and study this song that Moses was putting all this together as they was crossing the Red Sea, because we find when they got on the other side, we're going to look at the verse about Miriam and the women and this song in celebration. So singing is as much the language of holy joy as praying is of holy desire. So it's very important. And we know prayer and singing today is a part of what? Our worship. It both expresses glory to God, a recognition of God in prayer and his help and his power, and singing, giving him, and we're going to see this in this, the way this song is being structured. Moses had gone before them through the sea, goes before them in the psalm, and composes it for them. When the mercy was fresh, they were much affected with it when they sang this song. So all this is fresh, isn't it? Like I say, you can just see this, them singing this song and rejoicing and being happy and all like that. And yet we find that later on we're going to see something changes in their attitude. Something else about this song was interesting. I had never noticed before, but it's one of the oldest known hymns of praise that we have. One of the oldest known hymns of praise that we have to God. So that was real interesting. You know, we still sing, even though we went through the book of Genesis with a lot of first. What do we still sing? Maybe a lot of first. Okay? So really we're still in the Genesis portion of all this, aren't we? With the events and things that's happening. So thought that was real interesting about this song. And as we said, this is the Song of Moses. And verses 1 through 5 is considered the first stanza, and the Lord is a man of war. It's kind of taken down toward the end of that last stanza. So what I'd like to do is take a minute, and let's kind of read through this song, the first 5 stanzas of it, then we'll go to the next, and to the next, and to the next, okay? And as we read already, then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he had thrown into the sea. So we can already see allusions of what they were singing about. They could see and have seen the power of God and how he had triumphed over the enemies of Israel. Just think about this. Every god that was placed before Moses or the Egyptians, what did the God of heaven do? He triumphed, didn't he? And in the end, he did just like he told Moses he was going to do. He delivered the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage. And notice they make reference to the horse and his rider he had thrown into the sea. And we studied about that, about how the Egyptians following after them, what happened? They drowned in the sea. So we find that they begin to think about these things. And notice verse 2. They say, the Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him a habitation, my father's God, and I will exalt him. And so we find they're exalting God as their strength. Notice what it says here about that strength. The Lord is my strength and song. You know, they didn't say the Lord gives me strength, which he does, but he is what? He is the strength. The psalmist David, in one of his stressful situations, and I didn't write it down, we're not going to turn over there, but what did he say? I will look unto the hills of the Lord. So where did David recognize strength? In the Lord. The Lord is strong. He is our strength. If he wasn't strong, then we wouldn't have any strength. Okay? So they recognize this because they can see it. And notice what they say here too, that he has become my salvation. See, as you begin to pick these things apart, I just highlighted a few things that kind of jumped out at me. You can go back, Brother Griffith, you probably been saying some stuff that I haven't even talked about. We could spend a lot of time there again just on this psalm. Okay? And so we find, he said, he has become my salvation. He has become the salvation. You know what they're saying here? We couldn't save ourselves. God saved us. God put his plan in motion for salvation. So today, can we save ourselves in our own wisdom and in our own way? No. We have to go where to find salvation for ourselves. We have to go, of course, to the Word of God. And notice he says, what he says here, he is my God, and I will prepare him a habitation, my father's God, and I will exalt him. I will prepare him a habitation. You know, when we think about the habitation of God today, it's real easy to think about the church building, right? I mean, you know, it's some religions out there teach, you know, they have this big tabernacle and things like that out in Salt Lake City. And they'll tell you this is where God lives. But you know, the habitation of God is not brick and mortar now, is it? It's in the heart, isn't it? It's in the individual. So when somebody says, well, where does God dwell today? He dwells in each of us. A friend of mine that's in the religion that's based out of Salt Lake City many years ago. We used to talk about the Bible, and he used to talk about, well, you need the Bible and the Book of Mormon. And I used to tell him, well, that's a big problem right there, and. Just don't even talk about the book. We just talk about the and. Okay, well, you don't need and. You need the Bible. Anyway, one of their teachings was, I thought, real interesting, and I'm trying to remember, I have a copy of the Book of Mormon that he gave me and highlighted some things in there. But anyway, part of their teaching is that God does physically dwell on a star. I might agree. Where do you find that in? Oh, it's in a star chart. It's right here in the Book of Mormon. I said, wait a minute. I said, what I want you to do, I want you to bring me that star chart. Oh, we don't have a copy of it. I mean, you see how this thing can get from totally ridiculous to absurd in a hurry. You know? And so we find that God does not dwell like this. And maybe you see a piece of prophecy too about the habitation of God being set up one day in a temple made by hands in Jerusalem. So there's a lot of things that's going on here in this. And notice what he says here. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is a man of war. What does he mean by that? Is God like a warring tribal chief? Or like a king of some nations? Or he's just using the term war, a man of war, to denote power and strength. Who fought for them? They didn't fight for themselves, did they? You know, as far as we can tell, they had no armament when they left Egypt. We know they took a lot of the jewels and gold and stuff like that, didn't they? But you don't see where they ever picked up any weapons and took with them. Well, for one thing, that wasn't in the plan of God, and two, it might have been pretty foolish, because even though Egypt may be weakened, still pretty strong when them 600 chariots of war show up, aren't they? And so we find it was God fighting for them. They could see his strength and power in his name. And of course, they go to verse 4, and it says, Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. So this psalm talks about the event that transpired that has inspired Moses to compose this, the people to sing it. It all evolves around their salvation. Most of the songs in our hymnal evolve around what? Our salvation, doesn't it? So what's changed when you look at this really? What's changed? Nothing's really changed. One went from the physical, one goes to the spiritual doctrine. And so we find they talk about that. And notice what they said. The depths have covered them. They sank into the bottom as a stone. There was nothing they could do. They was helpless. When you throw a stone in water, and you know, as a kid, a lot of times, we used to go down to the pond, and we would take a stone and watch it skim across the water, right? But when it quits skimming, what happens to that stone? Sinks like a rock, doesn't it? That's where that phrase comes from, Brother Conner. Sinks like a rock, doesn't it? Well, this is what happened to the Egyptian army. They were drowned. You may as well say they sunk like a rock. There was no saving them. You know, when you stop and think about the power of this, how many Egyptians is recorded that were able to swim to shore? None. You know what that's a shadow of? It's not in Brother Roy's thing. You know what that's a shadow of? God doesn't want us to get rid of part of sin. He wants us to get rid of, Jeff, all of it. There wasn't no survivor. You know, that would have made God's power pale in comparison to one Egyptian that swam ashore, wouldn't it? That would have weakened it, wouldn't it? And so we find here again, that's another one, number 15, Jeff, for today. Okay? See how this thing keeps snowballing, and you can spend a lot of time in this. And so we find they were praising in this song. We find, and as we said, they begin to sing this song to the Lord. The second stanza, you have overthrown those who rose against you. And that's kind of the picture and theme of this when we begin reading at verse 5. I want you to notice what it says here. Now, I didn't go out and list all the scriptures, but one reference that I used in this said, when you see this right hand of God, that's used over 50 times in the Bible. Where is Jesus ruling and reigning today according to Ephesians chapter 1? The right hand of God. That's a very important statement. And even today, when we call someone our helper, what do we say here? He's my right hand. She's my right hand. The right hand is recognized as a source and symbol of power and authority, right? And that person is under your authority that's very obedient. So, are we standing on the right hand of God at the judgment? How's he going to separate the sheep from the goats? The goats are going to go on the left hand. And where the sheep going to go? On the right hand, you see. And so we find that this is the beginning of a thought pattern here too about the right hand of God. And the psalmist David talks about it in Psalms chapter 45 and verse 24. As one passage of scripture, and like I said, there's a whole host of scriptures. Thy right hand, O Lord, is become glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Lord, hath dashed in pieces the enemy. And in the greatness of thine excellency thou hast overthrown them that rose up against thee. Thou stretchest forth thy wrath, which consumed them as stubble. You know, now you get to kind of maybe a futuristic shadow of fire and stubble. You know, what had the Lord done? He had consumed them as stubble. Well, he was using water. Well, the point and principle is the same. What did the water do to the enemy that was after them? It consumed them. But now does water consume stubble, which is the leftover from grain and things. I don't know, those of you that raised on the farm, and maybe those of you that had folks that was raised on the farm, things of that nature, know that you separate the good wheat from the chaff, which is that which is not useful. The stubble is that which is left over. A lot of times, you know, when we pull corn for grain, to have to crush, the stubble that was left was a stalk weight. And what did we do with the stalk? Well, I remember a time or two we actually burned the fields, and people used to do that, didn't they? But generally it was discarded. It was plowed under when it was all over said and done. So are you not kind of maybe seeing a picture of what is coming in the future about the consuming of the stubble? It does kind of make you think down those lines. And with the blast of thy nostrils, the water were gathered together. The flood stood upright as a heap, and the depths were congealed in the heart of the sea. Now think about that for just a minute. You know, when we think about how God framed the world, you know, we find that we're taught in Hebrews chapter 11, beginning the first part of that how did God frame the world? He spoke it into being, didn't he? He didn't sit there, and we sometimes sing the song about the pot and the clay, talking about Jesus in our lives, but God didn't sit at the potting wheel somewhere, Brother Con, and spin this together. He spoke it into being, didn't he? So by his breath, because it's his creation, what did he do? And it's figurative language. He parted the sea. And when you congeal something, that means you bring it together, don't you? And you know, we talk about congealed salads and things of that nature in our lives, but what it's looking at here is the way it was done. It was heaped up on each side, the cloud and dry land. That's how he brought that together. And so we find the enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My lust shall be satisfied upon them. Talking about Egypt. Well, I'm going to go get them. See, Satan was after them. I'm going to get them, I'm going to overthrow them, and I'm going to take back my spoils. That was the attitude of Pharaoh. And today, what is the attitude of Satan? I'm going to get you. I'm going to take back what belongs, that I think belongs to me. And notice what else he says here. I will draw my sword, and my hand shall destroy thee. And this is a figurative language about the sword of the Lord. Did the Lord ever really draw a physical sword? No. But the sword of his word he drawed, didn't he? And the word today is our sword here. The Lord's sword, the Lord's sword, if you will, in a military sense, was the pledge. What did he use? His creation has a tool and means for an outcome. And we use this analogy, just stop and think about it. Jeremy's not here today. I think they're in Pensacola. But anyway, you got all these tanks, let's say, Daniel, sitting around. Hundreds of tanks and all these men sitting around. And you're expecting an anti-tank, like an A-10 Warthog or something like that to come in and all that kind of stuff, right? Well, how did God operate? Imagine taking that same scenario and sending a plague of hornets in that camp. Now, what do you think will happen? There's going to be a lot of slapping and running going on there. So what good are the tanks against the power of the Lord, right? You know, so that's the sword of the Lord. He uses his elements, the things that he's created. He has no need of tangible things. And we can think of other analogies maybe that we could use in there about how he destroyed them. What about the wheels of the chariot coming off? You know, we read about that in verse 26 of chapter 14. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch forth thy hand that the waters may come upon the Egyptians. And I must be a little bit too far down. Where am I at here now? I thought I had it right on the tip of my tongue. Let me look down through here. Oh, verse 25. I went a little bit too far down. I'm going to begin at verse 24. It came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked into the host of the Egyptians in the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily. What happened? Can you imagine that? Run along, drive that chariot, and the wheels come off. Well, that had to be confounding and confusing in itself, didn't it? So just think about those things. Thou didst blow with thy wind, the sea covered them, and they sank as lead in the mighty waters. And so it refers back to their salvation, and that happened here at this. Third point, verses 11 through 13, seems to deal with the third stanza. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? You know, there were many gods in Egypt, wasn't there? And this is the phraseology that Moses used here. Among the gods. Who is like you? What god of Egypt can even come close to having the power and authority that you have? Very interesting question, isn't it? And so we find, notice what he says here in verse, beginning verse 11. Who is like unto thee, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like unto thee? What power, what authority? When compared to the other gods, to the Egyptian gods. Who is like thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders. Just think about all that now. And that's what he done. You know, it had to be a great wonderment to the Egyptians and also to the Israelites at the things that were going on. This was not a traditional warfare that was happening, was it? This was not a traditional deliverance like we think of going in and conquering a country. Like we did France, for example. Who delivered France? Well, we know God's providence was working in that, but it was our military might that went in there and delivered France. This wasn't like that.
Showing all these mighty things that God can do. Embraces that we just read a while ago where it said the Lord is a God, the Lord is a man of war. But he is a man of war, but all he has to do is speak the word and it's done, no matter what it is, or raise his right hand, or either just whatever he does, whatever action he takes, proves his ability to stand out above any other God. There ain't no other God like unto our God. A while ago we was talking about the Lord being our strength. Made me think about the old memory verse that I had posted in one of them classrooms back there for years, right up at the top. Last verse of the 19th Psalm of David said, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so
And-
those, there's a lot of,
There is. There's-
well, it also reminds me of where it says that we live and move and have our being in him. In other words, we would be nothing without him.
Right, right,
But with him, we can be strong just like he's strong.
right. And that's what verse 12 talks about. Thou stretchest out thy right hand and the earth swallowed thee. Okay, that's the power and might of God, isn't it? Thou in thy mercy hast led forth the people which thou hast redeemed. Thou hast guided them in thy strength and into thy holy habitation. And so we find, and I'm going to move on a little bit faster because I want to really get through this today. The fourth and fifth stanza, the people will hear and be afraid. And that's real interesting, verses 14 through 18 through 19, if you will, about what he's going to say here. The people shall hear and be afraid. Joshua 2:10. What did Rahab the harlot tell the spies? We have heard about the power of Israel and what happened on the other side or east side of Jordan to those kings being destroyed. And if you want to read about that, that's over we may get to that in just a minute, the book of Deuteronomy, but let me continue that thought on Rahab. That statement she made happened approximately 40 years after the crossing of the Red Sea. So when they began to march toward the promised land and begin those conquests, it became well known, didn't it? It became well known amongst those nations around about them that you're dealing with a mighty people. Rahab recognized it. Hey, we heard about y'all. You know? And so in this song, they're already talking about the people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestine. And so we find that this is going to happen. These things are going to come about. The dukes of Edom shall be amazed. The mighty men of Moab trembling shall take hold upon them. And all the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away the fear of them. It's what they're talking about here. So this thing about Israel, the flood, and all those things that's going to transpire were well known. Maybe in a type, I remember my daddy saying that at one time when the power in the United States was at its zenith, that if you took an American, or you done something to an American overseas, all the U.S. had to do was mail a postcard over and say, you better let them go. Same picture here, right? I mean, word gets out that these people aren't playing, they're serious. You know? And so we find the same thought here about these heathen countries. Fear and dread shall fall upon them. By the greatness of thine arm, they shall be as still as a stone till the people pass over. O Lord, till the people pass over which thou hast purchased. So they're still recognizing the power and authority of God in this. Thou shalt bring them in and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hands have established. And it's talking about the promised land. We know the temple was built where? In the end. Mount Zion way. And so we find that you see some kind of twofold things going on with this as Moses has put this together. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. We know with Moses looking at himself being a type of God or a type of Christ, what's he looking at here? The Lord shall reign forever and ever. Well, he's talking about the power and might of God. But also are we seeing an allusion to the Lord reigning forever? Jesus is ruling and reigning where? On the right hand of God. How long is his rule going to last? Well, technically could have come just to church, but even on in eternity, right? He's still going to be king and Lord. So are you not seeing some of those shadows of those? Verse 19, for the horse went in with his chariot and with his horsemen into the sea. And the Lord brought them again unto the waters of the sea upon them. But the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. Boy, that's really a powerful song of rejoicing in it. I want you to notice something about that song. Notice who it glorifies. God. You know, no words mentioned glorifying man or Moses. You know, being a man, it would probably been real easy to stand back at the people and tell them, look what I done. But no, who got the glory? And in our hymns today, as we sing, who gets the glory in our hymns? God does. Are you kind of maybe seeing a pattern too in this hymn of what was to come as people rejoice in the power, the salvation of the Lord? You know, you can talk about that too. About some of the similarities maybe in our songs today that Moses penned as one of the known ancient hymnals, okay? It's kind of interesting when you stop and look at it. And I got to move on. We put this map up here a few weeks ago to show the route based on Numbers 33 of the route of the children of Israel. And so we find, and finally got the crop out to work on PowerPoint, maybe you can see it a little better. This is the area they're now in wandering. It's going to be from where they cross the Red Sea down to what's fixing to happen at Moriah, about a 3 days journey, okay? And then they're going to move from there to Elam where the chapter closes out. And I say all that because one of the things that we're going to notice as they're rejoicing here, what does it say in verse 20? Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a tremble in her hand, and all the women went after her with their trembles and with their dances. And so we find a great sense of rejoicing. And we know at this point in time, this is how they rejoiced, didn't it? It was done, and we still see that somewhat in the Middle East today, don't we? That a lot of times the women will grab their whatever, the trembles and mechanical instruments and go to singing and dancing and praising. So we kind of see that still today, don't we? And so Miriam answered them, sing ye to the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously, the horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. So this is a song of great rejoicing. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness. Found no water. So it's a 3 days travel in this wilderness. Of course, down here after they leave Elam, they're going to get into the wilderness of Sin. The Bible talks about as they head on up to Sinai, and we'll blow that up next week. So anyway, they're traveling here, and all that water that was in the Red Sea, what they got now? No water. They're in a dry and thirsty land now, aren't they? Literally, a dry and thirsty land. So what was this all about? What's happening here? What's fixing to transpire here? And when they came to Moriah, they could not drink the waters of Moriah, for they were bitter, and therefore the name of it was called Moriah. And so we find they couldn't drink that water. Well, we're going to come out here in the desert and we don't have any water to drink. That 3 days journey may be significant because from what I understand, if you go there and look at that, that's about how long you can survive in a desert environment without water. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 days in a desert, whole desert environment. So here again now, this was critical. Notice, and notice what they did here. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? Wait a minute. What had happened? 3 days earlier you were singing, and all like that. Probably were still singing up to this point. Now all of a sudden, guess what? What happened to your faith? And this is what this is all about. It's about their faith, and it's going to be about their health also. It's real interesting as we get into this. The people at Exodus 15, 24 through 26, it's going to tell us about the people murmuring. After 3 days journey into the wilderness. So how soon do we forget the power of God, right? How soon did they forget? And notice, and Notice what Moses does. He prays unto the Lord, he cries unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree which he had cast into the waters. The waters were made sweet. There he made them a statue and an ordinance, and there he proved them. So this was done to show again the power of God for their faith, and what's interesting, for their health. They were going to have to learn to rely upon. You would think after all they've seen, this wouldn't even become an issue with them. So sometimes you members of the church, and maybe we were like that, become a member of the church, and maybe because of not being accepted by family and friends, maybe in a few days we began to wonder, will I be better off in Egypt? You see, our faith hadn't been developed yet, has it? Our trust had not been developed yet, has it? And this is what's going on here with these people here. They had to grow into trust in the Lord. And in verse 26, after they went through this trial of their faith, in verse 26 and 27, and said, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all those statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee. Now watch this. I'm fixing to go to a point here. What's he say? If you will obey me and do what I said, I will put none of these diseases on you. Let me read you a thought on that. And then they went to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there, of course, by the waters. But before they got there, we're going to start to see a pattern of murmuring and complaining beginning. It's going to happen pretty quick again in Exodus chapter 17. We're going to see kind of a pattern that started. How long did they adhere to the power of the Lord that they had sought? But I want to read you a little something here about this disease. It's kind of interesting about those waters and what they're saying. And this is studies that were done by people that have went and spent their lives work on what all this means and what all this is about, and about what looks like maybe have transpired there. I'm just going to read it to you for the sake of time. A gentleman by the name of Buckingham explains how this may have worked. The chemicals in the sap of the broken limb drew the mineral content down to the bottom of the pool and left only good water on the top. Now, just bear with me. He further states that even though the waters were now drinkable, there was still a significant amount of magnesium and calcium in the water content. The laxative effect of this would cleanse out the digestive system of the children of Israel, cleansing them of common Egyptian ailments and things of that nature. Weakening the immune system also would be repaired, and that's found amongst the Egyptians. In addition, calcium and magnesium together form the basis of a drug called Olamide, used by athletes as a performance enhancer in hot weather. At Moriah, God provided the right medicine to both cleanse out their system and prepare them for a long, hot march to Sinai. You know, how much of that is and is not, I don't know, but it does mention whatever went on there. It had something to do with diseases of those people there. And we know as we get into the Old Testament and the book of Leviticus and things of that nature, they had a regulated diet. God wanted them people to be healthy. And I might stop right there because I'm already over a little bit. So, and we'll pick up with chapter 16.